Well everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy S23 Plus and basically see how this phone has been holding up for the last 2 weeks that I've had it. Now personally for me, I think I love this phone. I think it's great. Is it perfect? Maybe not, but I think Samsung has done a pretty good job with the S23 Plus so far. I'm hoping there's not some crazy big recall program with these phones in the future, but so far it's been so good. So if you want to pick up this phone, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now on the outside, when I look at this phone, right, it's so funny how these phones look exactly the same as the S23, as the standard S23. I feel like manufacturers, I feel like even back in the day, Samsung did a better job at kind of making these phones look a little bit different from these smaller phones to the bigger ones, from the standard ones to the plus ones. Even with the S22, I feel like they did something different. In this case, they are identically the same flat displays and everything. It's just a bigger device with a bigger battery, which I, think is fine. The Plus series has notoriously been very solid. I still remember the S10 Plus, the S8 Plus, and S9 Plus. Those phones were really good as well, and I enjoy those phones a lot. Nowadays, the Plus has now kind of changed to the Ultra lineup, so it kind of makes sense. But on the front of this phone, you actually do have a pretty solid 6.6-inch dynamic AMOLED display, and it's a pretty good panel. It's one of the better panels you can buy nowadays. It's a 120Hz panel as well, so things are very smooth. It's kind of common now to have that, so it's not really, I wouldn't even call it a feature anymore, to be honest, but it's more of expected and a given, especially if you're paying this much for a phone. This is not a cheap phone by any means, but one thing to keep in mind, and I'll get into the price tag in a second, let me finish off the body. So this thing, very good display, USB Type-C on the bottom, you have the SIM card eject tool on the side, hole punch display, which is great. On the back, you have the frosted glass back with its camera module on the top left. Now, one thing that I kind of do miss about the S22s is that the camera module was actually kind of protected in a way. So with the lenses on the back of the S23 Plus, the issue that we have here is that if you were to drop your phone or if you were to leave it on a table, it would just get scratched up like crazy. Like in this case, I've had it kind of happen with some iPhones too. It happens all the time. It's very common with a lot of devices. But in this case, with something like the S23 Plus or the standard one before for the S22, but with the Samsung Galaxy S22, those camera lenses were actually covered, which was actually really cool. So I say that to say, I actually do kind of wish these phones had that camera lens covering, but it makes sense because, you can easily tell which one's an S23 and which one's an S22. So that makes sense to me, but I kind of do miss, the older styling, to be honest. You have the frosted glass back still, which is very good. I'm glad they kept it and they didn't bring it to a plastic one here. On top of that, you are getting, your standard IMEI number and everything on the bottom half of this device. And yeah, I think this phone definitely looks very good on the outside. Now with the price tag thing that I kind of mentioned earlier, if you remember, essentially what's going on with a lot of devices is that, especially with Samsung devices, they depreciate in value very quickly. So if this phone was a $900 or $1,000 phone right now, probably within 3 months, you could probably find them available for $700 to $600. And then before the end of this year, they'll probably be available for $300 to $400, maybe $300 to $500, depending on the condition. So that's how fast some of these phones depreciate. So again, if you want to pick this phone up now, that's fine. But if you want to wait a little bit longer, you can always do that, especially if the new Galaxy Folds come out this year. And if the new iPhones come out, people switch phones all the time. You would think people keep their phones for a long time. I don't think that's the case. So in this situation, I don't think it's any different, to be honest, either. So at least on the outside of these devices and with the price tag considered, hopefully that makes a little bit more sense of where this phone stands as of right now. Now in the camera department, this phone has that triple camera setup on the outside. It's a 50 megapixel wide angle lens, 10 megapixel telephoto lens, then a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, and on the front of this phone we have a 12 megapixel wide angle lens. Now here are some things I want you to kind of remember. So we can do 4K at 60 on the front and the back of both these phones, which is always good to have. It's kind of like a given now. But we still have 8K video on the back, and it's been improved to 8K at 30 frames per second. So just to give you some perspective, a lot of phones in the market still do not have this type of capability. OnePlus and maybe some other phones are the only ones that do it, but nobody looks at those phones as direct competitors to something like a Samsung, at least in terms of the camera department. Samsung cameras are still top of the top in my opinion, and when you take a look at something like an iPhone 14 Pro Max, very good camera, but no 8K. You take a look at the Google Pixels, very good cameras, but still no 8K capability. These phones have had it since 2020, and that is still one of my favorite things about these Samsung cameras for a fact. So from that department, it gets a complete thumbs up for me. Now, still within certain applications like Snapchat and TikTok, they've gotten better, which is good, but it's still kind of choppy when zooming in and out of videos. That's the only thing I've been able to tell for the most part. But beyond that, I think the camera department of this phone, it holds up very, very well. The features within this camera are still top tier, and even though the quality I would say is kind of stagnated, they're still just so ahead of the competition, it's not even funny, especially compared to the Google Pixel in my opinion. So quality is one thing, it's the amount of features that you're getting in the camera that's a whole other thing too. So it's always something to keep in mind there. Now moving on to the software and the longevity of this phone, the one thing to keep in mind with Samsung is that they have made some big improvements the last few years of improving and increasing the software longevity of their devices. With the Galaxy S23 Plus, this phone is easily going to last 3 to 4 years at least. It may last even longer, who knows? So I will say this phone still has a long period of time ahead of it, has a long runway, and probably for a lot of people out there, you're going to upgrade your phones before it's even done getting software support. I'll give you an example with the S20 Plus. That phone, I don't really see too many people using that phone. I don't really see even too many people talking about that phone. But that phone is still kind of supported with software. How many people have upgraded their S20 Plus since it came out in 2020? Probably a lot of people. 2020 feels like forever ago. So with this phone, you have to kind of use that same philosophy. It's still going to be here. Like, this phone is not going anywhere anytime soon. And it's still going to be here for many, many years to come. So from that perspective, this phone has a long runway ahead of it, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Now on top of that, when we move on to the performance side, this phone internally has that Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chipset inside with 8 gigabytes of RAM. Now if we're talking about sheer performance, this phone is going to be a very fast performing phone for a very long amount of time. So with that Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, I think Samsung did a great job at improving the speeds and increasing the speeds of that specific device. Well, Qualcomm did it, but I think that chipset, and for sure was good in that department. It just wasn't as optimized. So it was heating up the phone a lot, was throttling a lot, the battery life wasn't that great. I think with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, at least with the recent update that Samsung just pushed out on their Samsung phones, the battery life has gotten better than the last generation. So it's, bigger size battery and you're getting a better optimized chipset. I think that's a win-win for sure. I still think though the iPhone counterparts, so if we're taking a look at the iPhone 14 Plus, that iPhone is still going to have better battery life than your standard Samsungs. But I do think over time it's going to get better optimized, and I think that's kind of what I'm hoping for. This is probably the one area where, the performance is great, but that optimization, it really needs to be done because we don't want Samsung or we don't want any manufacturer to have bad performing phones. They have the most potential of all time, but if their chipsets aren't that optimized, then there can be some problems. So I think this phone does a really good job at performance. I think at any game I've thrown at it, it's done really well. Genshin Impact, the highest settings, emulation on these devices, I've done it all so far, and it's been handling very well. I think the first update was bad, like out of the box, but the recent update was pretty good. So keep your phones updated and you'll probably end up getting a better version of an experience. So to kind of sum up this whole entire video, what I'll tell you is the Galaxy S23 Plus, I believe, is a very good phone to pick up. I think it doesn't really get too much better than this unless you're going for like a Galaxy S23 Ultra and iPhone 14 Pro Max. This is a very solid phone to pick up. Is it perfect? No. But I do think some of the highlights of this phone, the chipset inside, it's like a very, very fast performing phone. It's going to be supported for many years, probably up until like 2026 or 2027. It has a great camera setup inside of it. Huge future, massive potential. It just pretty much has it all. Good battery life. Like, this phone pretty much has it all. I can't really think of anything I hate about this phone, right off the, spot, but hopefully that kind of makes sense about where this phone holds up, at least for the last few weeks. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.